Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's public lecture. As you know, this year marks the 25th anniversary of NIAS. So there are some of the ways in which we have decided to celebrate Silver Jubilee, and one way in which we are celebrating is through a lecture series throughout this year. So we will have lectures from eminent scholars, scientists, artists, activists, and other people who have made a mark in the public. This lecture is the second lecture in the series of Silver Jubilee lectures for this year. It is my great privilege and honor to welcome Professor Madhav Gadgil this evening. Thank you very much, sir, for accepting our invitation. With over 200 research papers, 7 books, and several popular articles, Professor Madhav Gadgil has been a consistent, sustained sort of voice of reason, a calm and measured sort of voice and intellectual presence over the past many years in matters of ecology, conservation, biology, forest management, natural resource management, so on and so forth. As a completely uninitiated and non-expert sort of reader of ecology, I have always found his work extremely accessible and engaging. And as somebody who's an educator and who's interested in looking at social and political changes in India, I have also found his work extremely useful pedagogically. So I've used it in my class, and it's fantastic, particularly the political ecology angle of it, which I think is really central to a lot of contemporary debates that we are thinking through. Now, it would be wrong on my part to sort of talk about his honors and accomplishments, so on and so forth. That's a long list. And I think that his intellectual presence, his contributions go much beyond that list of honors. Also, it is very difficult to sort of give a new introduction to him in Bangalore, right? Because he, as we all know, he has been teaching in IISc for over 3 decades, and he also established the Center for Ecological Sciences in the Institute. In addition to IISc and several other institutes in India, he is affiliated with various institutes, various universities across the world. Among his other engagements, civic engagements and interventions, he is also involved in a lot of initiatives, including sort of, he's been a member of Science Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, a member of the National Advisory Council. He's also chaired NCRT's panel on environmental education, and recently he has chaired the Western Ghats ecology expert panel. So the title for his lecture this evening is Western Ghats, Nature, People and Development. The talk will go on for about 45 minutes to 60 minutes, and it will be followed by questions from the audience. Thank you once again, and I now invite Professor Gadgil to deliver his lecture.
Thank you very much, Shirali. It's a great privilege to be here and talk before this very distinguished audience. Share my ideas about ecology, but about a whole lot of other things also. And since NIAS has experts, scholars from a whole variety of disciplines, this is a particularly welcome opportunity. As was mentioned, I want to focus amongst other things on Western Ghats, and particularly things I have learned over last 2 years in connection with this work of this ecology, Western Ghats Ecology Expert Panel. But apart from that, I have essentially spent all my life very close to the hills of Western Ghats. I was born in Pune at the base of a hill called Vetal Hill. Vetal Hill is the highest point within the Pune city, and it's an eastern spur of the Western Ghats. And first 21 years of life I've lived, a large number of years of those were spent wandering around that Vetal Hill, which at that time had no peacocks whatsoever, no peafowl whatsoever. It had a lot of other birds, but absolutely no peafowl. Apparently, peafowl used to come in from time to time. They were promptly trapped and eaten by a number of hunter-gatherers who used to, they still wander around in that region. But I was away from this area for 40 years, and when I went back, I was astounded to see large numbers of peacock. Now on the Vetal Hill. And interestingly enough, when I was young and there were no peacocks, generally while wandering around Vetal Hills, I hardly met any people. I was by myself. One of our dogs and our 2 neighbors used to loan their 3 dogs to me, so 4 dogs and myself. And as I said, very few other people and no peacocks. Now you go to the same Vetal Hill, there are houses surrounding the hill on all sides, and on a Sunday evening, Pune is famous, its market street is Lakshmi Road, and the Vetal Hill sometimes looks like a Lakshmi Road. There is a huge number of people there. So you have all these houses, all these people, and you have all these peacocks. So the kind of notion that nature and conservation is always something which will not tolerate people. If you want nature, then it has to be pristine, unspoiled nature. You throw out all people, which is part of the kind of traditional conservation system, which is still very much a part of thinking of nature conservationists in the country. Certainly, this doesn't fit in with that kind of a model. And what I want to say is that much of how we think about ecology and how it should be managed and the kind of current paradigm, there are problems. And so I've been thinking in many ways about what has happened. Why have Western Ghats changed so much? And amongst other things, of course, why there are peacocks there. But maybe there are many other places where there is definitely a degradation of ecology. What is behind all this? And I think as an evolutionary biologist, what is behind all this, I think, is what now evolutionary biologists talk about as handicap principle. That is an important way evolution occurs. So let me explain the handicap principle. The favorite example of evolutionary biologists to talk about handicap is this big train of the peacock. The male every year grows these new feathers. At the end of the mating season, he sheds them and he has to regrow them. So it takes a lot of energy. And the males are actually probably at a much more serious risk of predation when they have this train. I worked for many years in Bandipur Tiger Reserve. There are lots of peacocks there. And when the wild dogs, particularly, that's the major predator there, they would chase the peahens who would take off instantly and escape. But the peacocks with their big train cannot take off instantly. So like airplanes, they have to run for a while and then take off. So they're definitely running more risks. And Charles Darwin was puzzled by this. He said, why is it that this unnecessary burden seems to be assumed by the peacocks, and then there are deer, some of them to have enormous antlers, which seem to be also a major burden. So why are there these burdens? And he said that it must have to do something with sexual selection. I mean, it can be incorporated in the ideas of natural selection, but this is something which is special. So he talked about sexual selection. And indeed, he wrote a book called Sexual Selection and Descent of Man. So he was also interested in how that applies to human evolution. Anyway, his idea is this, that for some reason, which he could not clearly understand, he said the peahens must be preferring peacocks with this big train. But then they are preferring peacocks who are running more serious risks. So why should they prefer them? Subsequently, of course, there has been a lot of work in the area of evolutionary biology. People have done both mathematical modeling, but also a lot of experimental work. And we now explain this through what is called as handicap principle. So what does handicap principle say? It says that animals sometimes, like this peacock, are indulging in major resource waste. But that waste is signaling that that organism that peacock has a lot of resources to spare. So if it's a weak male, he will not be able to develop such a big train. So by advertising waste, the animal is showing that it's a superior creature. It has genes, it makes it very fit, and the females are looking for such resourceful males so that their sons will also be resourceful, and maybe as they are attracted, maybe to their sons many daughter-in-laws will be attracted. So this is the notion of the handicap principle. And I said, now there are many interesting phenomena in evolution which are being explained through handicap principle. Now I want to suggest that much of what happens on Western Ghats is also explicable through handicap principle, and I want to come to that. But of course, this is something which an economist, Theodore Veblen, these ideas he came up with as early as 1917, though they have not attracted too much attention, as I understand, from the community of economists. He said that the notion that people are rational creatures who are allocating resources to maximize their well-being is not right. They are devoting large amounts of resources, if they can, simply to show off, and in fact probably hurt their well-being. That human beings are also incurring and displaying, flaunting their ability through incurring such handicaps. Of course, these handicaps are not entrained in our genes, but they are part of what we call memes. The evolutionary biologists say that there are many kinds of replicators. Genes are replicators. Genes make more copies of themselves through the processes of course, organisms reproducing themselves. So there are other traits, cultural traits, behavioral traits, which are also replicated. And so these have been given a term meme. And so, for example, wearing this enormous number of ornaments, which is certainly a burden to this Tibetan lady, is a meme, and it is a kind of handicap. She is also showing off how many ornaments she can afford, so to say. And there is a whole lot of these kind of behaviors. I want to give some more examples which are pertinent, but let me come to the Western Ghats. A very nice description of Western Ghat occurs in Raghuvamsha. Now, Kalidasa has this long poem, Raghuvamsha. In its fourth canto, he describes Raghu's Digvijaya, his conquest of all the four corners of India. Starting from Ayodhya, he moves around. He comes to southern India, and then he marches up the Western Ghats, then goes into Gujarat and Rajasthan. So during this march, Kalidasa is talking about Western Ghats, and he says, the Western Ghats are like a maiden. She is reposing with on her right side with her head at Agasthyamala. Animalize and Nilgiris are her two breasts, and Goa is her hips, and the feet are somewhere near Satpuras. So Aparantaka, is the west coast of India, and Western Apara is west. So Aparachala may be a nice name for the Western Ghats, and or Sahyachala, because Sahyadri is also a common name. So today what is happening is perhaps this maiden is being imposed an unbearable handicap. And in the process of people imposing this handicap on this maiden, she is being stripped of her green garments. So who is imposing this handicap? There's a whole lot of human tendencies, but if you want to pinpoint one particular phenomenon which is responsible, I think it is Dushasana. Dushasana literally means poor governance, bad governance. And I think I would like to try to show that it is current Dushasana which is haunting all of the country in a way, which is stripping the Aparachalas or Sayyachalas green garments. And I am afraid there is no Krishna who can continually renew the green sari, and perhaps some Bhima of people's power will have to come to the rescue. Just to step back and talk about these ideas of various kinds of replicators. Over the evolution of life, we see that living organisms, life started with very simple creatures. Now we believe in deep sea at these so-called hydrothermal vents. Then it has expanded all over the earth. It has become, living creatures have assumed greater and greater complexity of structure, function, interactions. And in the process, they have evolved new kinds of replicators. Two major ones which are now important in our life are memes and artifacts or machines. We make copies of various memes. So you had this song which became a rage, whatever, Kolaveri D or something. And millions of copies were made, and even my 5-year-old granddaughter was singing, and all over Pune at least people were singing. So it's a meme which is copied and copied and copied, just like genes, but much more rapidly and in a different way. And then of course artifacts which we make, animals also make, and there are interesting parallels, but we make particularly very large number of artifacts and produce more and more copies. So like this laptop or whatever, which is produced probably thousands and tens of thousands, more or less the same, but not necessarily exact replicas. So there is variability as in living organisms and evolution. So this deep sea anglerfish has an angling rod and an angling lure, which are genetically programmed. But humans, of course, we don't carry on our bodies angling rods and angling lures, but we have memes of techniques of angling which are passed from person to person, and artifacts like this angling rods. So as I said, these are also replicating entities, and they undergo evolution very much like genes. And indeed, our world is populated then not by just genes and living organisms, which are of course carriers of genes, but also memes or behavior patterns copied through social imitation. Many social animals also show examples of this, but human beings with our symbolic language and tremendous ability to develop a whole lot of cultural behavior patterns have a much greater variety. And tools, artifacts, of course there are artifacts like bird nests, but again humans have produced an incredible range of artifacts which are copied through social activities. So these two, the memes and artifacts, also multiply. They also, like genes, exhibit heredity with variation, and like living creatures with their genes, they also increase in abundance, diversity, and come to occupy newer and newer set of environments. I want to give some examples in a little while. So when will this happen? When will memes or artifacts grow in numbers, grow in diversity, grow in complexity? This will happen if they confer some advantage either on their bearers or the designers, fabricators. So Ayurvedic knowledge, amongst the oldest forms of memes, is knowledge of herbal drugs. Even chimpanzees are known to use herbal drugs, but humans in all civilizations have for tens of thousands of years used herbal drugs. So their knowledge certainly must have helped people perhaps survive better or reproduce better. It has been elaborated over years. They would have used some narcotic drugs also, maybe in moderation, as part of the treatment. But interestingly enough, it is not as if genes, memes, artifacts, they will grow, increase in numbers if they confer some advantage on the bearer. We now know that probably in our own genetic makeup, only about 5% of the genetic material is actually functional. There is some 95% which people aren't quite sure what is the function. And one suspicion is, they are called in fact selfish DNA, that it is simply that this genetic material is very good at making copies of itself. And indeed, this 95% selfish, or another term used, the junk DNA, is full of repetitious sequences, and it would appear it is there taking a ride just because it's very good at making copies of itself. It is of no particular advantage. It does not enhance our well-being, bearers' well-being, and all higher organisms seem to have a lot of this kind of selfish genetic material. So I think it's also that there are a lot of selfish memes and, in a way, selfish artifacts, that is, behavior patterns, artifacts, machines, which really do not enhance our well-being, but they are there and they grow because they are very good at making copies of themselves. So one example, of course, is computer viruses. So they make their own copies and they spread. Another could be just addiction to drugs. And drug addicts certainly do not benefit by it, but it is known that drug addicts make others addicted to drugs because they will gain some money out of selling drugs to them. And so memes which are clearly, behavior patterns which are clearly hurting everybody get propagated. And it's certainly a major phenomenon that in spite of all the problems, drug addiction grows and grows and grows in many societies. And narcotic drugs get produced in greater and greater quantity, although again, certainly they don't seem to enhance any human well-being. And of course, both the memes, of course, scientific knowledge, technology is also clearly a kind of a meme, and artifacts which are produced using this knowledge, such as armaments, are a product which is related. There is this famous story of Tipu's rockets, since we are in Bangalore. In the first war with the British, Tipu employed rockets which he had got from China. The Chinese had been using them for a long time, and the British army was taken completely by surprise, and it was defeated. So that was the first war, some 1780, I think. The Tipu won that war. But Tipu did not have the meme of growing this knowledge. So he had acquired these from Chinese and he kept using them as they were. When the British ran away, by that time they had developed scientific methodology of growing this knowledge. So they collected some unexploded rockets, went back. They had their own armament factory was at Woolwich, that Woolwich Arsenal, attached to which was an R&D unit. The R&D unit at Woolwich Arsenal, it analyzed this rocket, it worked out how it functioned and how one should defend against it and how one might start producing it. And I think the next war, some 10 years later, maybe 1790, British were equipped with this, all this knowledge. Tipu's knowledge had stood still, and British had better artifacts, and Tipu was defeated. And then eventually, of course, in 1798 or 99, he was completely vanquished. So, growth of knowledge, growth of armaments, of course, aggression has played an important role in wars, competition, and certainly over the last few hundred years, you see this rapid growth of science, technology, and artifacts related to especially war, which have driven the growth of other artifacts. So we are in an age where all of this is on an ever accelerating growth. But as I said, what I want to also talk about is, of course, these armaments, in a way, certainly they help the well-being of the British by it becoming possible for them to conquer India and acquire a huge lot of resources. But there can be artifacts purely as handicap. As evolutionary biologists, we say that human behavior is underpinned by natural tendencies, but it is highly flexible, and each person has unique behavior patterns which are shaped by his or her social milieu learning. There is certainly a strong natural tendency to strive to rise in social hierarchy. So common across all human beings is an urge to be higher up in whatever social group, climb up in whatever social group one is a member of. And as with the peacock, we can see that this social status is linked to the ability to bear a heavy handicap. So people, I think, there is, as I said, this was what Theodore Veblen talked about, that a lot of economic behavior is to be explained by people's tendency to flaunt their ability to bear a handicap. And let me tell you a story of a personal experience. I live now in Pune in an apartment complex which was constructed 12 years ago. It's very well constructed, and every flat has flooring, very well done flooring. There is absolutely no reason why anybody would want 10, 12 years later to change that flooring. But of course, that flooring was older technology. It was not such an expensive flooring. So now much more expensive tiles are available, marble-based tiles. And we have neighbors who make a lot of money. One of them turns out she is an architect lady, and she is very prosperous. So she decided that 10 years have gone by, and now I have bought this very nice apartment, but that's not enough. So now what should I do to flaunt my further wealth? So I must remove all the earlier tiles and replace them with marble tiles. In the process, of course, you break and you completely waste the older tiles. They cannot be recovered. So you break them, you remove them, you bring the new tiles. You create incredible amount of dust and noise. And you yourself, of course, begin to suffer from asthma. But when you are living in a society like ours, all the neighbors also get into great distress. And what happened was that under the apartment below her, they bore the brunt of this problem. And then through this process, it started leaking, water started leaking into that apartment. So this gentleman went up and eventually in frustration slapped the old lady. And so they all went to the police. So I mean, obviously major cost was borne in this attempt to flaunt her wealth. Now, finally, of course, the flooring is complete and there is peace. But clearly, I mean, apart from spending a lot of money and showing people that she can spend all this money, she incurred other costs also. And I think a great deal of such handicaps are continually being borne and affect us. Including even small things like, I think, shoes. JBS Haldane is my great hero, you might know. He was a great biologist, one of the greatest evolutionary biologists of 20th century, who left England when England invaded Suez, saying that I can no longer tolerate living in this imperialistic country. And he became an Indian citizen. And he started wearing Kolhapur chappals. And when people asked him, why did he change it? He started wearing dhoti also. Kolhapur chappals, he said, 60 years in shoes and socks is enough for one lifetime. So in India, I think for a lot of conditions, the shoes and socks is again a kind of small handicap. It doesn't do you any good by and large, but you show off, and a lot of clothing and the whole range of things are clearly meant not to be utilitarian, but to show off your status, to show off your abilities. But these are costs. So the main point is this, that apart from this marble flooring helping that lady in whatever way, it has it promotes a whole lot of marble mining. And I have friends in Rajasthan who are spending much of their time fighting against this marble mining, which is ruining agriculture and water sources in large number of villages in Rajasthan. So I think this is, and there are many other ways one can see how this kind of wanting to flaunt your wealth through some kind of a handicap has clearly implications for our resource demand, our environmental issues. Now, since these have kind of continually grown, the artifacts have grown in size, complexity over time, and therefore the resource demands that artifacts end up making obviously are also growing. This is just an example. I plotted water-going vessels over historical time, and you can see how they are both becoming more and more complex and more numerous. There is an interesting story anyway, maybe it's a diversion, but let me tell you. I have a friend who is works in a merchant navy, and I was asking him about Somali pirates because he has a lot of difficulties now. His ships cannot come directly as they used to come to Mumbai, so they have to make big detours and hug the coast to avoid Somali pirates. So I asking him, how have Somali pirates come into being and how are they flourishing? So there is a whole lot of reasons, but one very interesting reason. People who want to flaunt wealth want to grow wealth as quickly as they can. He said one of the fastest way of growing your money in this world today is to fund Somali pirates. And there are apparently a lot of wealthy Europeans who are funding Somali pirates because annually you get 200-300% returns on your investment. And then they can go on and flaunt their wealth even more boastfully. So, and of course these artifacts are evolving much more rapidly than life ever evolved, because life is just a very simple bush of evolution. Artifacts is an incredible web of evolution. This is just an illustration of a whole lot of vehicles of how this has gone on, and in fact continually evolving. Now at the level of genes, you might have, many of you might have heard of this book. Richard Dawkins, an evolutionary biologist, has written a famous book called The Selfish Gene. And an underlying thesis is that an adult organism is genes' way of making more genes. So chicken is an egg's way of making more eggs. The chicken is there just so that eggs can produce more eggs later. In a similar fashion, we are perhaps finding that men are becoming machines' way of making more machines. And indeed, this is a very interesting idea which was introduced by the writer Samuel Butler in a novel called Erewhon, which was written just a few years after Darwin published his Origin of Species. And Samuel Butler became very interested in the idea of evolution, and what I have been talking about, a lot of what I have said was said in his own literary way by Samuel Butler, that machines like living organisms are evolving and they are taking over the world. And he said that we will find very soon that humans will become slaves to the machine. And Erewhon is a story of a country where humans saw that they were becoming completely enslaved by the machines and then revolted and so on. Anyway, but we can see this in, for example, in the case of fishing industry. Goa, the estimate is that at best 50 trawlers will catch fish fairly effectively on Goa coast. Today there are 400 trawlers operating, and the 400 trawlers are catching many fewer fish than 50 trawlers were catching earlier. It is just because there are just too much of fishing effort being exerted, and you then have all these vessels. Of course, a lot of energy and resources have gone into producing these vessels. Lot of energy goes into fuel to take them around, and with all this you are catching fewer fish. So clearly this is where humans have, in a sense, become slaves of these fishing trawlers, but they cannot stop also, because one person cannot reduce and there seems to be no way to reduce. And this is not atypical of the world. Goa is nothing special. Apparently all over the world there is enormous overcapacity of fishing fleet and enormous overfishing and a whole lot of other problems. So obviously these fishing craft and fishing as thing have gone well beyond what is good for us. And there is a whole lot of other, I think, fields where you see. And what is driving world economy today? At least three major things they say that is driving world economy is arms, glamour, fashion, and drugs. All of them certainly in the long range do not enhance human well-being. I have friends in cosmetic industry and so on. So they are saying that the fastest growing, fastest selling produce is these fairness creams. And as biologists, we know very well that a dark skin is really much more appropriate to keep your health in India. Fair skin is a maladaptation which has come to be here because about 5,000-6,000 years ago, people who had evolved in very much cold climates in large numbers came into India. But it's certainly in no way it is healthier to have a fairer skin than a dark skin. If anything, it is better to have darker skin in our country. But this craze about fairness cream, and now they are talking about ladki ke chora chora ke tum laga rahe ho, and boys are also have their fairness cream. And all of this is complete madness. It in no way enhances your well-being, and it certainly physically also some of them have unhealthy, but psychologically surely damaging. Anyway, so huge amount of humans are currently spending enormous quantities of resources and certainly making huge demands on resources of the earth in doing all sorts of things which do not seem to enhance human well-being in any way, and which certainly either seem to be there because so to say these artifacts are taking over what is happening in this world, or because of this handicap principle. And I think the current craze of talking of development only in terms of growth in gross domestic product, I think is certainly a part of this men becoming machines way of making more machines. That much of this 9% or whatever growth which is the current ideal which is being put before us is doing us any particular good. And what has happened is with this growth of technology particularly, the capabilities of interfering in the environment, they have grown substantially. I'm looking at mining in Goa, and they said that not too long ago, people were simply taking out ore, digging with pickaxes. Now you have these enormous earth-moving machines which are taking out huge swathes, and Goa's environment has certainly been ruined. And not only has environment been ruined, but employment has substantially reduced, not only in mining, because now machines are doing all the jobs, but also in agriculture, fisheries, which have mining has very adverse effect. Now all of this is permitted and happens because of corruption and lawlessness. And so we are in Karnataka, and we have maybe many of us have read Santosh Hegde's reports of Bellary mining and so on. There is no question that this corruption and lawlessness has skyrocketed. In Goa, you can see particularly this rich and poor divide has widened. And in context of environment, one interesting example, there is the coastal regulatory zone, which is being used to demolish fishermen's shacks. And fishermen cannot afford to go to court. But when a miner has built a huge hotel violating all provisions of coastal regulatory zone, Goa legislature has passed a special act regularizing that hotel. So this is the way this divide has been tremendously growing. And those who are powerful, in their hurry to make money, are ignoring all this environmental damage in Goa and passing on the cost to the ordinary people of Goa. And this is aided by a lot of environmental misgovernance. I want, as part of the Western Ghats Ecology Expert Panel's case studies, this is something, I will rapidly go over it, a windmill project called Enercon. Now windmills, sure, are of course in some ways a very desirable source of energy, green energy, and we have made the decision that since this is green technology, environmental damage should not be thought of, no environmental clearances are needed, windmills can be put up as they wish. And they are being put up in an area where Maharashtra has this state animal, is our giant squirrel, lives. Now, one particular project which we studied as part of the panel's work, it is in the, this is where this project is located. Now, Maharashtra already has established a ecologically sensitive zone around Mahabaleshwar. It's a continuation of that forest here, and the Bhimashankar Wildlife Sanctuary is here. In 2002, the Indian Board of Wildlife had said that 10 kilometers at the boundary of Bhimashankar Sanctuary and all other sanctuaries, there should be ecologically sensitive zones should be established. So this was an area where beginning 2002, special protection should have been given. This was not given. Just to give an example, this is an area which is very rich in biodiversity. I think Reni is here. I'm sorry, Reni, I don't have a proper picture of Xylocoppa tranquiberica, but I believe this is some other Xylocoppa. She has found that this is a bumblebee which has color vision in the night, one of the very few creatures in the world which has this. And this is timber trees cut for this windmill project where the Xylocoppa tranquiberica nests. It's an area, just to show, very rich in biodiversity. It has been protected traditionally through the system of sacred groves, where Bhima originates. That area is called Gupta Bhima. That was a sacred grove, and indeed that has become the core of the sanctuary today. So this is the area up to this 10 kilometers, this area, sorry, this blue line, this up to this 10 kilometers, this area should have been protected. All these windmills have come within 10 kilometers. Now the range forest officer, poor honest fellow, gave a report about when the windmill project was coming up, that windmill project should not be allowed. This is a biodiversity rich project, forest next to Bhima Shankar has giant squirrel, wolves, all these animals and rare medicinal plants, and you should not do this. His boss completely overruled him, and he made these actually fraudulent statements that project area as such does not have any significant wildlife. Indeed, it has all these animals. I personally, Reni has of course seen them lots, and I personally went and stayed in one of those villages recently, and it is just full of wildlife. This actually distances are also wrongly quoted. This is not 3.5 but about 1.6 kilometers anyway. And it talks about bushy, that this whole area is only bushy growth rather than trees. You can see this is the so-called bushy growth. This is a very good evergreen forest. These are roads made for accessing the windmills, which are going through this very good evergreen forest. These are Reni's photos of the giant squirrel nests. There is supposed to be green technology, so you should not think of environment. And a good friend of mine, he retired, Deshpande, retired as Secretary PWD Government of Maharashtra. He has spent his life building roads. So I took him to show him these roads built by the windmill, during windmill construction. He was aghast. He said they have been incredibly careless, and they have simply at the lowest cost built those roads, leading to all these landslides and so on, which were completely unnecessary. They have damaged the fields, they have damaged this medicinal plant area which was protected by government itself. The forest department, while the clearance was given, it was specified that the villagers' free movement should not be stopped. Now, completely illegally, the forest department and the windmills people have got together, and the windmill has captured whole hills. They have only been given permission to construct on the hilltops, small areas. They have simply captured whole hills. And people are saying the windmills are not producing much power. I do not know. The whole project is meant to get large subsidies and then convert this into a resort, because this is a beautiful area where they can build very expensive houses. These are all my interpretations. Pardon me, we can discuss them. I think, why is all this being done? Because we have policies of permitting very high profits by allowing environmental degradation, which certainly also affects the poor. Here in this area, a lot of farmers have lost their farmlands. And there is this famous memo. In year 1991, we undertook economic reforms. And very interestingly, Larry Summers, who later was Secretary of Treasury under President Clinton's equivalent of our finance minister, and then he was president of Harvard University. In 1991, he wrote this famous memo, and it is on World Bank's advice that we instituted our regime of economic reforms. And what does he say in this memo? He says, he was the chief economic advisor, World Bank, as I said at that time. The measurement of the costs of health impairing pollution depends on the foregone earnings from increased morbidity and mortality. From this point of view, a given amount of health impairing pollution should be done in the country with the lowest cost, which will be a country with the lowest wages. I think the economic logic behind dumping a load of toxic waste in the lowest wage country is impeccable, and we should face up to that help. Okay, so as I said, it is on his advice, in a sense, that we have elaborated this regime of economic reform, and one should judge what might be the consequences. So I think, again, as I said, I am venturing outside of areas where I am any specialist knowledge, but I think what is happening is that through this regime, we really, of course there is economic growth, but it is not sustainable economic growth. I think this is, okay, sustainable economic growth. It is, along with, there is serious environmental degradation, there is certainly growing social strife within Naxalite areas. Actually, I have been working for 20 years in Gadchiroli, which is one of the Naxalite strongholds. Things are growing worse over these 20 years. Earlier, I used to happily sleep in these villages in Gadchiroli. Now the villagers say, you go back to the town at night, it's no longer safe at night. You come in the daytime, we'll work together, don't sleep here. So things are growing worse there. And outside of such areas also, there is growing social strife. And certainly we have loss of independence of policy making. But interestingly, there are other kinds of developments. And I think these can also be related to the idea of handicap. Because handicap is not simply by accumulating wealth and flaunting wealth. Handicap may be in showing courage to opposing those who are rich and powerful. And I think there are people, not very many, but who deliberately take on those who are higher in social hierarchy, incur some risks, and thereby certainly gain social prestige, just as flaunting of wealth does. And I guess, or at least this is my interpretation as an evolutionary biologist, that social and environmental activism, a lot of it is promoted by this kind of wanting people, at least some people, to show courage and to oppose these kind of activities. This is just one of the recent, so this lady in the middle is of course the famous social activist Medha Patkar. Maharashtra government has passed an act saying that no dam shall be filled unless all the villagers whose houses are going to be submerged, whose fields are going to be submerged, have been fully compensated and rehabilitated. So this is a dam called Wang Dam in Satara district, where substantial number of people have still not been rehabilitated, they have not received compensation. They have filled the water this year, and all of them are standing in water. So you have, as I said, on one hand, handicap driving environmental degradation, social strife. On the other hand, handicap in terms of course, here not flaunting wealth, but flaunting courage, driving struggle against that. And I think it is in our democracy and in revival of communities playing a role that you will have in future perhaps much better environmental governance, and in general much more sane development if people, not machines, are placed at the center stage, in which case development and conservation can be seamlessly harmonized. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk before you.
Published on the Western Ghats. Is that going to result in anything, or is it going to be a battle?
Okay. I think it is going to result in some very interesting things, because the government, what action it will take, we will see. But it has attracted a lot of people's attention. And at least in Pune, I live in Pune, so I am in touch with a large number of people there. I have, in fact, next few days, invitations, apart from the activist groups, that has been going on for some time. They have invited me to explain the ideas and facts which we have recorded in the report to them. But now political parties, I have invitations, interestingly enough, from a socialist group, a communist group, and Bharatiya Janata Party. On 3 successive days, to their political workers, they want me to come and explain the report. So this will be an interesting experience. So surely people are paying attention, and government will eventually have to pay attention. I do not know what will happen. It's impossible. I never thought that there will be this kind of response, and so many even political parties will take notice. But so it is happening. We'll see.
When the government announces an ecologically sensitive zone, usually there will be human inhabitants which may be about 60 or 50 years old. So how we can tell them on one fine morning to move from there or restrict their activity?
Yeah, this is I think a major misunderstanding of what ecologically sensitive zone should be. But it is true that lot of conservation, so-called, is being practiced through the notion that people are an impediment, that moving people is the key to conservation. But I started off with this example of peacocks. I think that's a wrong supposition. In any case, if you see the legislative basis of ecologically sensitive areas or zones, it is very clear that it does not involve any displacement. All it says is that specific to that locality, proper, acceptable environmental conservation measures should be instituted. And our report, in fact, strongly stresses that this is what should be done. And as an experiment, in Sindhudurg district, I spent time trying to tell people that, really it is not that it should be bureaucratic regulation, it should be the regime of management which you should want to put in place. And as many as 25 Grama Sabhas have sent resolutions saying that their area should be made an ecologically sensitive zone, and they have suggested a whole series of environment-friendly measures which they want. And as the current legislative framework which is used to declare ecologically sensitive zones, this is perfectly the right kind of thing to do, in fact, that they should decide on environment-friendly measures which should be instituted. So there is no question of displacement whatsoever.
Okay. Yeah, so I was just thinking basically regarding this Forest Rights Act that was passed. There's one theory that's going around which says that how Forest Rights Acts brings, by converting a lot of this commons into private property, also brings it under the question of eminent domain. So do you really see any of that happening? Basically it has made acquisition for, let's say, projects very easy, and there have been journalistic reports of things happening in Jharkhand where some of the tribals own large tracts of land and without their knowledge. And the second question is also basically like what you keep talking about. Is also what has been this kind of a rapid capitalist expansion. Would you really call it what Karl Marx called it as the primitive accumulation of capital? Which has been treated as something central to the logic of capitalism itself, not something peculiar to the 91 policy or current polity itself, but it's central to any capitalist expansion.
So the first response to Forest Rights Act is that it has been certainly also perhaps used in ways which are environmentally destructive. I am not very familiar with the situation in Jharkhand. I am very familiar with the situation in Gadchiroli, where a lot of Forest Rights Act implementation in the right spirit has been done. And my friends have been involved, so I know. And there, in fact, it has favored better environmental management. But other places it could have been misused. There is no doubt about that. That there seem to be accounts of that. I am not personally familiar. As far as your economic terminology is concerned, I am innocent of that. However, I have the following experiences in relation to capitalist and communist regimes and what happens to the environment. That before Eastern Europe became kind of accessible to people to understand what is going on. In fact, many people were saying that in these communist countries, environment is being taken very good care of. But when the communism withdrew, plenty of evidence has come, and I had an opportunity myself to go to East Germany and Hungary and see with my own eyes that under communism, because people could be suppressed so easily under communism, there was far greater damage than in the capitalist Western Europe. So I do not know, as I said, all these terms like primitive accumulation of capital and all I am innocent of, but the experience has not been that under communism environment was taken good care of.
The concern that you have, which is the degradation, environmental degradation, linking up to memes, as you said, that there is a kind of, that kind of a theorization basically says that all human tendency is similar, but the problem, even as you said, that there was a culture which was like interested in protecting sacred groves, and there is a culture which is, or let's say the last example you showed, which is trying to accumulate or internalize, basically more, what is not your own, or which is a colonial kind of colonizing instinct. And there are two instincts involved, and by using the word meme, we are giving a biological universality to it, which erases the separate instincts that different cultures have harbored.
No. I mean, in my slide also I said that there seem to be certain innate natural tendencies, but the expression is very variable because of particular histories, including social histories, cultural histories, individual histories, and certainly there is no implication just by using the term meme that there is kind of a homogeneity. Just like genes, in fact, people misunderstood. Until the modern molecular techniques have revealed the enormous amount of genetic variation, there was a misunderstanding that there is very little genetic variation in natural populations. But we now know that there is an enormous genetic variation within natural populations. So there is certainly enormous mimetic variation within populations, human populations. Just using the term meme doesn't mean that everything is the same at all.
Lecture by combining memes and artifacts. I thought these are entirely different because memes is still, I believe, a concept, whereas artifacts are something becoming exponentially much more powerful than that. And evolutionary wise, this time scale is very different from the time scale of artifacts. Am I mistaken?
No, sir. I mean, all scientific knowledge is also a meme. And atom bomb, underlying that was a certain meme, our understanding of atomic structure and forces. And underlying rockets is also other scientific knowledge. So, and that is also growing exponentially with artifacts. So certainly meme is any kind of behavior tendencies which are copied, and knowledge, all of knowledge certainly has to be viewed as a meme, including scientific knowledge. That I agree. So there are differences clearly at the gene, meme and artifact level, but they are all entities of which more and more copies are made, but not exact copies necessarily, copies with variation. So all of them can evolve.
This is more of a conceptual question. You have referred to evolution, which, in an essential sense, refers to change. You have also referred to conservation, which, in an essential sense, refers to stability. Now, there seems to be, some kind of contrast, or if you push it a little more, it becomes a contradictory kind of relationship. And how do you, look at this kind of relationship in terms of contrast? The second thing is, evolutionary biologists have always, dealt with evolution in terms of some kind of random process, where, the changes are not always under, a certain kind of control, and there's not much of a direction. Now, in the case of conservation, you can intervene and show some kind of, selection, some kind of direction. So that also. given these, conceptual, issues, I think these issues also influence, whatever social development that you've been talking about. So how would you resolve these, conceptual kind of issues, and then, see whether, it has any impact on whatever kind of social, development in proper direction you wish to.
Yeah. I mean, certainly. So there is change and there is some stability, constancy, as you are saying, development, conservation, perhaps. Point is that even at genetic level, we are seeing that why did sex evolve? Now, evolutionary biologists say that when DNA began to be damaged and there was too rapid change, then you needed mechanisms to correct excessive change in your genetic material. And sexual reproduction is one way. By creating two sets of genetic material in each individual, you can compare and correct for the mistakes. So yes, through evolution also, certain stability, constancy has been in fact growing, not necessarily. So I don't think there is contradiction. As far as the randomness element, yes, at the genetic level, as we understand, processes seem to be random. But certainly, when we are growing scientific knowledge or when we are making better and better artifacts, these are very deliberate processes now. So this randomness, there is still replication with variation. In one case, the variation is perhaps due to completely random factors. In other case, to volition. But still you can have evolution. So the rate can be very much more rapid when you have this change with volition, so to say, which is why genetic evolutions, the rates are far, far slower than the current rates of change of memes or artifacts.
With the rates at which the environment is getting degraded, is there genuinely a change in people's perception or the way they think about? Because people have seen these changes from, it has been very long. So is it a type of adaptation that people will still continue with the environmental changes, or as you said, the selfish gene concept, it will only try to propel the humanity towards its survival? Is it that way? Which I needed your comments on this.
Yeah, I think there are all sorts of forces acting, because there is a very interesting paper by a zoologist, evolutionary biologist called Slobodkin. Are there any prudent animals? And he poses the question, are there any animals which seem to modulate their behavior consciously to control excessive, say, killing of prey? He comes to the conclusion, and we now, this question has been examined further by biologists. No, there are no prudent animals. But humans are certainly prudent animals. Humans exhibit prudence only occasionally. Nevertheless, we have deliberately prudent behavior. And conservation practices are not something just today. We have certainly evidence from the oldest times, oldest cultures of conservation practices like sacred grouse, giving protection to sacred animals, very much more. Many anthropological studies have shown, say, on Pacific Islands, that very primitive communities there were doing fishing with a whole lot of very interesting conservation rules. So it is there also along with the other cultural traits. Now, how everything will play out is, I am certainly not in the position to be sure, but you have this many contrasting, and as I was saying, the handicap principle itself may be interpreted to say that some will merely grow and flaunt wealth and damage environment, the others will flaunt courage and stop damage to the environment. I know some people there, they seem to be remarkable people. They are small, from small farming families, and they are standing up to Mr. Ajit Pawars of this world and fighting. So it's quite remarkable. You don't know.
Debate of sorts is on with respect to this Western Ghats.
When you quote my lecture, please don't quote Mr. Ajit Pawar's mention personally. Anyway.
Right. my question relates to this current debate about Western Ghats, whether should it be World Heritage Site. If one looks at the pros and cons objectively, is the decision about it clear-cut or does it fall into the grey area?
See, we have said that as experts, we have produced, I think, one of the countries, or the only one so far, a good information-based system for taking environmental decisions. Now, the detailed decisions should be made by actually looking much further into greater detail at the situation. The panel does not have the capability, it could not possibly have. Few people working for few months cannot really give the fully fleshed out recommendations as to what should happen. It should be worked out through democratic processes. That is how we are saying. I hope that democratic processes will take over, and this would provide the basis for very good further action. We have spelled out what is happening on ground. As I said, we have created a very good computerized database to help in this process. But a very interesting precedent is Goa's regional plan. Goa currently concluded an exercise called Regional Plan 2021, where the task force which was set up, it said that we are not giving detailed prescriptions on our own, but they compiled all information of current land use in Goa. They made their own suggestions, but this document went to every Gram Sabha and every Ward Sabha in Goa. They examined it and they gave their feedback, which then was to be the final basis for decision. So we are suggesting some such process should be now launched in connection with our report. And the versions, of course, being made available in local languages, not just in English. As I said, I apologize for mentioning Ajit Pawar by name, and I don't want to comment on government's good sense and bad senses that way. I mean, the people should examine the arguments. I don't want to take issue very specifically with what the governments are saying. I will take issue with the fact that governments tried to suppress the report for a long time. I think that's anti-democratic and improper. These comments I do not know.
Thank you very much, Professor Gadgil, for the lecture and for May I now request Professor Ramurthy to please present Professor Gadgil with